Umusopa, Umusopa. Warm greetings to everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunities to update you about the Selling Peace Park. There have been countless acts of violence and human rights abuses against the indigenous Karen people over more than 70 years. And so the Selling Peace Park, in the heart of Kotule, the Karen homeland, is the manifestation of years of committed efforts by indigenous Karen communities, leaders, and Karen civil society organizations to create an area where peace, self-determination, and environmental and cultural preservation is a reality. Communities in the Selling Peace Park aim to live on their own ancestral lands in peaceful coexistence with plants, animals, and other ethnic peoples and communities in Burma, Myanmar. However, the Burmese military has never shown an interest or commitment to building peace or demilitarizing Karen lands and have long threatened the environmental integrity of the Salmon River Basin area. The Burmese military has wanted the area that is now the Selling Peace Park as a site for mining, hydropower, and other destructive infrastructures. Since 2010, and especially since 2018, throughout Burma's so-called transition to democracy, the military intensified efforts to expand military infrastructure through our current territories. They have fortified their military bases and roads while expanding into areas controlled by the Karen National Union, the KNU, in explicit violation of the now invalid NCA. A series of harrowing murders of civilians last year ignited the outrage and led to several peaceful protests by Karen communities demanding the end of military occupation of their lands and immediate stop the road construction in their territories. Mortar shelling by the Burma Army has been happening almost daily in areas of northern Karen state since December 2020. Shelling has continued and intensified since the 1st February military coup with attacks in Mudra district, and since March 27, 2021, Karen people have also been terrorized by area attacks. Since March 27, there have been almost 30 air attacks and over 50 bombs dropped, along with machine gun fire from aircraft. The Burma Army has also fired almost 600 mortars into villages and farmlands, and they have looted villagers' rice, money, motorbikes, and farming equipment. Since March 2nd, the bombing and shelling has killed at least 14 civilians in Mudra district alone, injured 28, destroyed 20 houses, 2 schools, and 5 village rice supplies have been burned. The Burma military have also shot at villagers' boats carrying food and other aid supplies along the Salami River. As many as 60,000 people are currently displaced in Karen areas, and over 12,000 are hiding at the border, with some communities having crossed over into Thailand, others pushed back by the Thai army to Burma, and some sheltering on the Karen side of the Salami River. Currently, the Thai authorities are not allowing any humanitarian organizations to access internally displaced peoples or refugees or either side of the border. What does resilience look like during this time of crisis? Conflict and oppression is not new for the Karen indigenous people, it's not new for ethnic nationalities of Burma, and it is not new for indigenous peoples all over the world. Karen people have been fighting for their rights for over 7 decades, and this is the latest iteration of Burmese military oppression under the recent coup. Karen community leaders are working hard to try and coordinate information sharing and communication despite the regular internet blackouts as well as organized aid provision to IDP communities. The Selling Peace Park governance structure has been functioning throughout this crisis to monitor the situation, support active communication, and provide regular updates to the advocacy team. The Salome Peace Park governance structure has contributed a lot to this crisis response. Civil society groups are also working together with local leaders to coordinate aid delivery to IDPs around the border. Karen people know how to hide in the forest and use their traditional knowledge to forage for food. For example, many of the ICCAs within the Salome Peace Park serve as a refuge for our indigenous people seeking safety. These conserved areas are historical places of refuge for our Karen people who survived there during a wave of Burmese military violence in the 1990s. Years of dedicated indigenous conservation efforts have made these areas well conserved with a wealth of NTFPs. Indigenous Karen's protection of their ancestral territories of life has also enabled them to offer support and shelter to thousands of people from central Burma involved in the civil disobedience movement who have fled to Karen areas in search of relative sanctuary in the thick forests of Kotule. Some Karen communities have used their indigenous traditions and taboos to protect themselves, including Da Popa Doma, traditional preemptive ceremonies to protect their community from the Burmese military's attacks. 3 to 6 days after the ceremony, outsiders are not allowed to enter their territory. Karen communities also carry out this kind of traditional ceremony earlier in the pandemic. In some townships, community rice banks, which have been established over the past few years based on the principle of sharing and caring for people in the community, have been helping people in their time of urgent need. Local authorities at the township level and village tract level discuss how and where to distribute these rice reserves. Community initiatives like these are still providing sustenance for people in this desperate conflict situation. This is especially important in an area deep in Kotule where aid access from outside the area is very difficult. Indigenous Karen communities are doing their best to cope with the current attacks, but their suffering is very real and thousands of IDPs are in urgent need of food, health care, shelter, and clean water. Villagers who in recent years had just begun rebuilding their lives, returning to their original communities, and laying a foundation for lasting peace, are now fleeing once again, traumatized into the forest and mountains. Resist violence and imperialism. This coup, although it has unleashed terrible violence and tragedies, is a rare opportunity for the oppressed people of Burma to join together against a common enemy, the Damodar, which have wreaked tyranny over Burma's communities and landscapes for generations. Now is the time for many peoples of Burma to join together, and now is the time for indigenous peoples across the world to recognize our shared struggle against imperialism, state violence, and capitalist exploitation. Finally, I will conclude my presentation with our call for solidarity. We call on the people and organizations around the world to pressure your governments to impose a global arms embargo on Burma and to impose strong sanctions on any business giving revenue to the military. We call on the international community to avoid giving any recognition or legitimacy to the military junta, State Administration Council. We call on the global indigenous movement and the international community as a whole to recognize the legitimate government of Kotule, the Karen National Union, and recognize Kotule as a legitimate self-determined indigenous territory. We call on the ICCA continue to support and stand in solidarity with the indigenous Karen people who are under attack. Without effective community-based governance of the Salome Peace Park, an ecosystem of global conservation importance will be destroyed. Thank you very much.